So now we're going to bring in Josh Smith, who is the lab director for ABKO Labs, one of our sponsors. And let's talk a little bit about what you guys, I mean, you guys not only test cannabis products in the sense of THC level cannabis products, but I'm told by your boss that you can also test hemp products for heavy metals, things like that, right?
Yeah. Actually, before I came on at ABKO, I've been running a hemp and CBD lab in Madison, Wisconsin, which, as Rick mentioned earlier, I'm quite excited for them to finally join the club and start moving towards the rest of the country and with legalizing. But yeah, we do all the hemp products. Some of the strangest things. I mean, it's a never ending. It's always fun to see what actually comes in that week. We've had things like socks. People have asked us to test for CBD, dog treats, honey sticks, gummies, flowers, oils, tinctures. Somebody tried to send in salsa one time. I mean, it's just all over the map. So it gets interesting. But pesticides, mycotoxins, your Aspergillus, E. coli, all that. Same thing that you do for every other compliance test here, as well as sex testing of your plants.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm also on the iHemp Hour on Thursdays. I'm certainly not a farmer, city boy, but I've learned a lot about the growing process. And cannabis is just a question of the THC level, right? In that case of hemp, it has to be currently below 0.3%, which ludicrous standard set by the DEA. They're hoping to get it up to 1%. And of course, on the other side, THC, they're trying to get that in the 30 to 40% range in some cases, some less, but they're all looking at, whether it's a pure product, whether it has, any kinds of bad things in there, because everything goes into the human body. So talk a little bit about that. What sort of things you're really looking at?
Well, you bring up kind of a good point. I actually have started really trying to stress calling it high THC and low THC cannabis, because it is all cannabis. It just depends. I mean, one's like your purple flower versus your blue flower. But when you're going through, because cannabis is such a major soil remediator, it's for anything growing outside, it's pesticides and it's your heavy metals are the big ones. If it's grown outside, it's going to have, it's going to have yeast mold on it because it's outdoors. What you can be kind of watching for is spray over from your farmers down the road, spraying their corn, their beans, whatever. That can sometimes pop up on your sample or on your plants. And also too, we've had some people came in that haven't used pesticides on a field for 3 to 4 or 5 years, and they still come up with trace pesticides that would pop up. So, I mean, those are the main ones. It's funny how with the 0.3, most states, it's still state to state. And for example, any of the ones that are in the USDA version, it's a hard 0.3 total. A lot of other states, well, they round differently. Wisconsin, up until the end of this year, I believe, is 0.3999 and below, rounds down to 0.3. There are other ones that are 0.35 and down, but it's kind of a nightmare going back and forth and keeping track of all the different state compliances. The one thing I will add, though, is that the vast majority of states do not require anything but potency testing for their CBD hemp products. Also, because it's math, 30-to-1 ratio is about as I've seen a little bit on 32-to-1, but about 30-to-1 is the max for CBD producing plants right now. So if you grow it outside, you are going to max out being legal. And if you're going by the strictest sense of the word 0.3, you're going to be legal at about 10% CBD. So anybody that's in a shop, you go into a hemp shop or whatever, and you buy a flower that is 15, 20% CBD, that's actually marijuana. So just as an FYI for everybody out there, because I don't see anybody going in and busting those shops, but at the same time, if you are over 10%, chances are that flower is going to be technically marijuana.
And of course, we're getting into harvest season here, September, October, particularly for the hemp folks. Marijuana, the THC level stuff, more grown indoors, not always, but more grown indoors. I don't know if too many, in fact, I don't know of too many places where they are growing it outdoors, but certainly the harvest season is coming up. So one of the things that they're going to be curious about is how quickly can you turn your tests around?
If you're just doing so for most people that are doing hemp, they're just doing their monitoring, they're checking it out. It's usually until things get really, really busy. We say 3 to 5 business days. If you really need it that night we have options where you can just call us ahead of time to make sure that we can, as long as the sample's there by 1 o'clock, we can usually get it on the machine that night for an extra fee for overnight. But usually it's 3 to 5 business days. And because we know people are watching THC for harvest and for compliance, we really try to push them through pretty quick.
Understand. Yes, particularly this time of year. Rick or Jamie, do you have any questions for Josh?
Josh, you mentioned that testing for Aspergillus. How frequently do you discover that? It's really a hop pest, not traditionally associated with cannabis.
Well, depends on your Aspergillus. But it's something that's more, you're used to seeing it a lot more in other food products. So like peanut butter actually is a big, one of the things that gets checked for Aspergillus a lot. So, I mean, in plant material, it's not very common. It still pops up regularly enough that it's probably worth testing for. Although my personal belief is I don't think all of the 4 or 5 strains that they have you test for, I don't think you need to test for all of those. I think it probably is going to come down to 1 or 2 until somebody actually goes through and does the survey of the plants. But I do think it should only be 1 or 2 of the strains.
You also mentioned that there's a discrepancy in different state testing standards. Now that's true both with CBD or hemp testing as well as cannabis testing. Some tests are less stringent than others, but yet still each state thinks that their testing standards are adequate and safe. Really, safe cannabis isn't necessarily defined by the toughest testing standards. Safe cannabis can still be determined by the weakest testing standards, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, and this is where it would be very nice if federal legalization came through and just standardize it across the board. I think part of my take on it is that I don't think we need to go to the Canadian standards or like the Maine standards now, which are a little more rigorous than even California. I think a kind of a happy medium is going to be somewhere in like the Colorado, Oregon, Washington middle ground. Especially my background being microbiology, I tend to lean a little more on, I do think some of that should be screened for, especially for medical patients, being that fungal spores if you're using flower, fungal spores, especially if you're using a vaporizer, it doesn't get hot enough to kill off all the fungal spores. And you have immune compromised patients. That's my bugaboo, my stick. But there are a lot of things that, I really don't think the limits are, like California, I think the limits are a little over. The Canadian limits, I think, are a little, their action limits, I think they're a little lower than they should be. But that's, no one's actually done that work to say, oh no, this is exactly what it is, or what we even expect to see. But I would say it's probably a happy medium would be somewhere in that Colorado, Oregon level.